Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. We're greatly honoured today to be joined by Dr Olivia Ong. Dr Olivia is a life and business coach who specialises in helping medical doctors with a focus on avoiding burnout. And I'm sure that everyone in the audience would recognise the great work pressure that people in the medical profession are always under, and that burnout is a very real thing for them. We'll discuss that today, but we'll also branch out to discuss what that might mean for leaders in other fields. Dr. Olivia is the founder and CEO of an organisation called the Heart-Centred Doctor, and she's the author of an upcoming book called the Heart-Centredness of Medicine, which is due for release on the upcoming Are You OK Day. And we'll speak more about what Are You OK Day means during the interview. So without any further ado, Dr. Olivia Ong, welcome to the show. Please say hello to our audience and tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to be with us today.
So thanks, Mick, for having me. I'm Dr. Olivia Ong. I'm a pain physician based here in Melbourne, Australia. And a bit about my background. So I've been a pain physician now in Melbourne for about 3 years. And prior to that, I've been a rehabilitation physician. So I actually subspecialize in pain medicine. But what led me to form my company, the Heart-Centred Doctor, was quite a few, personal stories and also insights and observations that I've seen as a pain physician here in Australia. So when I was a junior doctor in 2008, I was involved in a car accident. So I sustained a traumatic spinal cord injury, which led me to become a paraplegic. So I was wheelchair bound for a couple of years. I was not able to walk, and I had to travel to the United States, in San Diego, in fact, to a particular rehabilitation center called Project Walk. And this particular center helps spinal cord injury survivors walk again. And I spent about 3 or 4 years there along with my husband. We relocated from Melbourne to San Diego for a couple of years to purely focus on my rehabilitation. And luckily, I managed to walk again, but I still have deficits from the spinal cord injury. Spinal cord injury is a lifelong condition. And unfortunately, with spinal cord injuries, there are several physical issues like lack of mobility, bladder bowel issues. And that's what I've had to deal with up to this day. And in fact, a little bit about my professional life before my injury. I was already feeling quite burnt out, to be honest. And the injury, strangely and interestingly, made me slow down because I had to now focus on my recovery to learn to walk again. And just remembering when a baby learns to walk. And, children and babies are actually the best mindfulness teachers. They're so present in the moment. They don't really care what's going on around them, and they just focus on what they're doing. And to me, my learning to walk again experience made me slow down, made me appreciate life and friendships and connections a lot more. And throughout that journey of learning to walk again, I learned a very powerful life lesson actually called self-compassion. And self-compassion essentially means people have done extensive research on self-compassion, like Kirsten Neff in the US have done extensive research on it. But to put it to your audience in a simplified, version of it, it's essentially accepting that, you are human, you have imperfections, and then you're just ready to accept yourself and then move forward. Essentially, that's what it means in a nutshell. It's self-love and self-acceptance in summary. And that's what I learned in Project Walk. I learned to accept my injury for what it was. Literally, it was really difficult for me to transition from being a healthcare professional in the medical workforce to a patient in the healthcare system. That was a big identity adjustment, to be honest. And I managed to eventually accept that. And I learned to thrive in that identity. I learned about personal resilience, post-traumatic growth, and I grew and expanded as an individual. But when I went back to Australia in about 2012, I went back to the workforce. And again, back to the usual pressures of medical workforce, which is increased physician workload, system structure, not great. And it's been an issue for like 20 years and nothing's really done about it. And I'll probably touch a bit about our discussion later about what's happening right now in the physician realm because of COVID. So that really adds a lot in terms of burnout and moral injury and lots of other interesting topics that we'll touch upon later. So I experienced that. So not only I have to deal with my injury when I entered the workforce again, I had to deal with the demands of the workforce of being a medical practitioner. And and my son was 3 at that time. So I had the additional burden of motherhood. And before I knew it, I had a severe burnout experience in 2019, which I had to take several months off work. I just couldn't get out of bed one day, literally couldn't get out of bed physically. And it's because having to juggle all those, all the balls and being on the hamster wheel, it exhausted me and just crumbled. When I got back to work after the 3 months off work, to deal with my burnout, I had to see my GP, saw a psychologist for a brief period of time. So I got back to work, but something was still missing. Like I describe burnout as a deep wounding to the soul. Like physically, you might be all right, but there's something in the soul that has suffered, and there's that deep black hole like I talk about. And for a while, I was still trying to search for answers. Being, an academic, of course, I'm going to look for answers, right? Like buy lots of books on Amazon, looking up on burnout, reading articles on burnout, but I couldn't find a satisfactory answer, I guess, to that particular problem. And then COVID happened last year, which also forced me to slow down. And I actually got a coach to coach me through my blind spots. And that helped me, I guess, manage my burnout a lot better. And because of the transformation I had as a coachee, and I decided I would like to do that for my peers, and I became a leadership coach for doctors. And I'm also a business coach right now as well, just purely because I want to help my medical peers recover and prevent burnout in not only their personal lives, in their professional lives, like their career and business. So that led me to form my company, the Heart-Centered Doctor, and which also led me to write my book about physician burnout. But most importantly, I feel the reason why I set up my business was because I've just seen way too many of my peers burn out and not seeking help. And I'm sure this is across not just the medical workforce, it's across leaders, the leaders that you work with, leaders in not only the corporate workspace, law, any industry, even parents right now who have had to homeschool their kids for like the last 18 months, especially in Australia or Melbourne, where I am, where we're still in lockdown 200 days later. And yeah, it's just burnout is not just a medical workforce issue, although the COVID has obviously made that situation worse for our frontline healthcare workers, but it's also affected, globally, people as a whole, collective, and more so leaders where I feel not just in the healthcare space, also, I guess, in other various spaces, that not only they have to deal with, work structure, organizational, they have to deal with their own internal stresses. Leaders also have to homeschool if they're parents, and they have to juggle their work and then juggle managing their team. So really, that's a lot of stress and a lot of workplace burden, and hence, if I'm not surprised if they're also very burnt out right here, right now. And suddenly we are talking about in America, where they're kind of seeing the tail end of COVID, or what it seems like the tail end of COVID at the moment. They're dealing with what we call post-COVID stress syndrome. So let me specifically refer to, I guess, the frontline healthcare workers. Just a bit of observations of what happened last year. So these frontline healthcare workers have been isolated from their family for extensive period of time. And as leaders, they need, as leaders, we need connection. And that's how we thrive as humans, right? We need connection. Unfortunately, these healthcare workers haven't had that, that privilege or luxury. I don't know, they were just trying to battle COVID, dealing with the pandemic at the front line. And not only that, they had to see patients, colleagues, family pass away in front of them every day in, day out. They have to make life and death decisions. Literally, they have to decide who gets to be safe in the COVID situation, who doesn't. And that's really quite a very, difficult decision. Definitely a very difficult decision for them to triage who gets to be safe and who doesn't. And that constant, conscious affliction has affected their moral self. And as a result, they're beginning to exhibit trauma symptoms at the moment, beginning to exhibit what looks like PTSD. They call it post-COVID stress syndrome or post-COVID traumatic stress syndrome. So there's a lot of research and topics now. They're talking about, academics and researchers are doing lots of research about it. It's surveying lots of frontline healthcare workers and what they experience of dealing with the pandemic. Not only that, and there's a lot of anxiety, depression in healthcare workers, and 30% of them have actually decided just to leave the profession altogether. So you can imagine what this would do to the medical and nursing workforce in 10 to 20 years. There'll be lack of nurses, lack of doctors. So where do we go from there? So that's what's happening right now in the US. So they're starting to talk about it. There's a mega global health trend. Doctors, nurses just leaving the profession altogether.
There's so many things there to unpack, Olivia. That was a lot, but I'd like to go through a few of the things that you said there and dig a little bit deeper for our audience and think it through. So some of the things that caught my attention, you mentioned about seeing the world through the eyes of children, and that children are very mindful. They're very good at being in the moment, but they're also very good at looking at things without judgment and without any kind of bias. So we're not necessarily born with bias, but bias is something that develops over time. And I want people in the audience at home to think about that, looking at the world through the eyes of a child, being in the moment without judgment and without bias. I want to then build on your experience when you've had that life-changing event in 2008 and you're converting now from medical practitioner into being patient. What did you learn from that about being in the moment, about bias, and about not having judgment?
Okay. So how I'm going to touch on that question will be based on my personal experience first, and how those factors have actually. I've been, I guess, as a doctor with a disability, I guess I've been unfortunately the target of unconscious bias from my own medical peers. So I'll probably touch a bit about that, and also how I learned to be more mindful, because as I've touched upon with my personal story, that journey to learn to walk again was certainly my first experience of mindfulness. And because I was so present in that moment of learning to walk again, which I had to, because if I don't learn how to walk properly, I'm going to fall down and hurt myself, right? That's obviously at the back of my mind when I learned to walk again. Initially, I had lots of fears of, oh gosh, what if I learn to, the trainers are eventually, going to not be there with me to train with me all the time, right? They're going to let me go and do my own recovery program. But I remember in the early stages, I was really quite cautious and very fearful. But I think being present and being mindful just taught me not to be scared anymore. And that's why I think being present, it made me enjoy that journey to learn to walk again, much more meaningful, much more joyful. And I remember when I took my first steps, and I know my trainer just said, I'm just going to not, support you anymore in terms of physically supporting. Like initially they had to like hold my hips or hold my arms because I just needed support. Neurologically, I was still trying to walk like a baby when they're first starting to take their first few steps is a bit wobbly. I was exactly like that. I was so scared to fall down. I don't know, because I'm a doctor and I'm always thinking about worst case scenarios. Like, what if I break? What if I fall down? If I break my hip, hit my head? I always, all these fears were coming. But throughout that journey of learning to walk again, I began to let go of those fears because I was just being in that present moment. I was enjoying the journey, even though physically it was tiring because I was working out and training 5 hours each day, Monday to Friday. It was like a boot camp, to be honest. And I've never had to do such a boot camp ever. Like at the most prior to my injury, I was going to the gym once or twice a week for half an hour. That was it, that was it. But this, even though it was physically quite challenging for me to learn to walk again, but boy, I enjoyed that journey. And it made me appreciate life so much more, made me realize that there's more to life than just, all these personal, external achievements that we all strive for. And I realized that internal transformation was probably the best gift that injury actually taught me. And I think as leaders, we can't change sometimes we just can't change the organization. We just can't. Sorry. We just can't change the organization. But, like in terms of structures and systems, which have been there for years, but as leaders, we can change what happens in our inside world. That's the thing. And I know I've come across medical colleagues who say, I'm just too busy, I'm just too busy running my team. These are medical leaders. I'm too busy running my team. I just don't have the luxury to, look after myself. Similarly, I'm sure in the other workspaces like corporate law, any other industries, they'll probably come up with that kind of rationale, like why I'm just too busy. For example, Arianna Huffington is one of my greatest virtual mentors. As we know, Arianna Huffington is quite a very big advocate on burnout in general. And I remember her saying, because she talks about her own burnout experience where she was so burnt out that she actually collapsed and then hit her face against her desk and she broke her cheekbones. That's how exhausted she was physically and emotionally. And I always remember that, and how she got back to where she is right now, such a big proponent of and advocate of burnout. In fact, she's got so many books on sleep revolution and burnout and a few other things. And I remember her talking about, because she works with big CEOs, big companies, and she, when she tries to coach them or mentor them, the first thing they tell her is like, I don't have time to look after my well-being. I'm looking after a big corporation. I'm doing all these things. Like, I don't even have 5 minutes to go for a walk or breathe. And I think she talks about how to them, you can't. You have a big corporation, but if you don't look after yourself, you can't be there to serve your people and your organization. And I think she goes on in greater details and talking about box breathing, because she does a lot of breath work. She does a lot of mindfulness. And I'm pretty sure that's a big part of her mentoring program for these big CEOs. And I think as leaders, we can transform our inner world through many tools. Like mindfulness is one, breathing exercises to calm our nervous system when we are internally stressed, certainly, and many other leadership tools that we can harness. There's just so many out there that this obviously interview we can cover all of them, but we have all the internal tools to do it. And I think as leaders, we have to look after our well-being. We have to. I don't really buy the excuse of, I don't have time to look after my well-being. Really, it's not an excuse. And I know, it's quite cliche to talk about the oxygen mask thing, to be honest, because we hear about self-care, oxygen, put your oxygen mask first. But especially in healthcare where I'm in, it's an ocean. It's actually an ocean of healthcare. And we need, like scuba divers, they have the oxygen tank behind. That's what we need. We need to be there because we'll be underwater, we'll be submerged, we'll be challenged, but we need to have that scuba tank all the time. And that's how I see it. I guess back to your question about bias and like children being quite mindful and curious. And I think as leaders, we have to have this element of curiosity. And I think because of our day-to-day pressures in dealing with our workload as a leader, we kind of get stuck in that autopilot, which is not mindfulness at all. If you think about it, being autopilot means you just like tick boxes on the checklist saying, oh yeah, I've done the meeting, I've spoken to the stakeholders, I've done this, I've done that. And before you know it, it's evening time and then you're like, okay, I got to prepare dinner for the kids, blah, blah, blah. And then it becomes another tick box, to be honest. And I guess mindfulness involves a lot of being present and also involves a lot of curiosity. And I think if we adopt that mindset as a kid with that curiosity mindset, I think it will serve us really well. For example, let's say if your team members come to you, one of them is burnt out, because you will, as a leader, you will not only have to acknowledge that your early warning signs of burnout, you have to kind of observe what your team members are at, whether they're burning out as well. So when you see a team member close to burnout, you have a conversation with them and you say, that's where it comes, when we talk about Are You Okay Day, that's another way to check in with your team members. And as I'm speaking about curiosity, one of the ways is also to be curious about your team member. Like they could, you will see signs of early signs of burnout, like they are just not, one of them, they're not performing, they're becoming quite cynical, there's a personality change, and they're taking lots of sick leave, I guess, from work. That's one of the early signs. And I encourage leaders out there to just adopt this curiosity mindset rather than starting to judge your team member and all the harsh criticism, which sometimes, unfortunately, some leaders tend to do that. I have to acknowledge in the medical space, there's a lot of that. I'm sure in other spaces there can be such leaders. But I want to encourage leaders out there to adopt a curiosity mindset. And yeah, that's based on our role models, children, as being greatest, having that curiosity mindset. And touching a bit about bias, we see this a lot in medicine, if I want to put it in context. For example, as I've got my own experience of having been through other people's biases against myself because I have a disability and I was transitioning back to the workforce. Because I've been away from work for about a couple of years and they're judging whether I was able to perform to my usual competency where I used to be as a doctor. But I obviously, managed to kind of quell those biases because I learned I had to subspecialize, take exams and the whole, physician journey. And now I'm a qualified rehab and pain physician. So I managed to squash those biases. But one of the biases that we see in medicine is, when patients come to us, patients who don't listen to our advice, to be honest, we can form our own biases too as doctors. And that's probably a thing that we shouldn't be doing. And I'm sure that biases can be in many different ways, can be biases against, people not paid. Like, for example, I just alluded to patients not taking our advice. We form some, preconceived biases about that. Like, because maybe they're too busy trying to, to seek, like in my industry, pain medicine, they're too busy just trying to take their opioid medications or something, to be honest. I can say that. Or they're neglecting their family, their health and blah, blah, like all that kind of things come up. But biases can occur when there's age bias, gender bias. There's also body habitus biases too. And I'm pretty sure there are healthcare professionals out there who form biases against people who are overweight. There's so many all these unconscious biases that we don't talk about, but we need to talk about it because it certainly affects healthcare decisions, in the medical industry, healthcare industry. And biases out there, not just in the medical industry. As I said, gender and age is definitely the big biases that I can think of. And as leaders, probably in the non-medical space, that can certainly come up. and especially if biases against parents who are working, I guess, trying their best to manage parenthood and work, and I'm sure there are biases against them too. So yeah, those are my basic observations of biases in both industries, the medical and non-medical industries: age, gender, and parents, working parents. These are the three that I can think of.
So for the audience at home, it's something that you know that we're very passionate about here at the Leadership Project, and that is for you to become aware of your own unconscious bias and to make sure that it's not influencing the way that you treat people, the way that you view people, and certainly not influence your decision making, whether that be conscious or unconscious bias. Coming back to something you said earlier, Olivia, so you were mentioning about the cliche about the oxygen mask. I guess it is a cliche, but it rings true for many people. If I could pivot that in the medical profession and just say that a doctor can't help anyone if they're collapsed on the floor, or as you said in Ariana's example, not a medical doctor, but if she's got her head collapsed on her desk, she's not helping anyone. And you mentioned that doctors feel that they don't have time to look after themselves. I would say that they don't have time not to.
Exactly.
For those very reasons.
Mm. Yeah, I guess if doctors they can't look after their own well-being, they're not going to be good to anybody, really, to themselves, to their patients, to their loved ones.
And now we can extrapolate that to leadership. If a leader is not looking after themselves, there's no way that they can look after their team with the right level of care and duty. You mentioned before self-compassion. Let's dig into that a little bit more. What does self-compassion mean to you?
Self-compassion to me, there are three pillars that I speak about with self-compassion. So interestingly, the first pillar is mindfulness. You know how we've been talking about mindfulness and everything? That's the first pillar. And I'll expand into the three pillars after this brief outline of what it actually is. First pillar is mindfulness. Second pillar is connection to self and others. And third pillar, which I think is the hardest pillar to kind of learn as a muscle, is self-acceptance and self-kindness. This is, I think, the hardest, and I'll go into it. And coming back to first pillar, that's mindfulness. We spoke at great lengths about mindfulness, just being present in that moment, being curious. But one other component of mindfulness and self-compassion is actually acknowledging in that present moment that you are suffering. And as leaders, we suffer a lot of internal stress. And we always try to numb it down because we're leaders, right? We have to put up a facade. We have to pretend that we get it, we have it all together, but inside we're crumbling. And some leaders are probably experiencing this right now as they're trying to juggle many things at the moment, and there are many balls in their court at the moment. So I think as leaders, this first pillar, mindfulness, means that they have to acknowledge that internally they are suffering. They are close to burnout, or some of them are already at burnout. That's the first step, just acknowledging that they are suffering at that present moment. And second pillar, as I've talked about, is connecting to self and others. You know, like a lot of doctors and many other healthcare professionals are so burnt out that they can't even see that they have hope. They feel helpless and stuck. And I'm sure a lot of leaders, not just in the medical space, just feel stuck and helpless. And one of the things, and Ariana Huffington talks a lot about this because she deals with a lot of burnt out CEOs in who she works with. And one of the ways she connects with them, which is talking about this pillar connection, is through storytelling. And she talks about Marcus Aurelius, that she sends them a free PDF on Marcus Aurelius poems. And this emperor, I think he was an emperor. Yeah, he spent, I don't know, like she's mentioned about 90 days dealing with the plague. That was at that time, obviously, in that context. And he's probably burnt out, to be honest, dealing with 90 days of plague of some sort. And he wrote beautiful poems about it. So burnout has always been talked about, even in Marcus Aurelius' time, you see. And Ariana Huffington actually sends out poems written by him to all the burnt out CEOs and organization leaders that she works with. And that's how she connects with them, it's through storytelling. And similarly, we bring to this, this context with leaders in the modern age. I think connection with storytelling is one way to, kind of explain to them what the second pillar is, because they wouldn't understand what connection to self and others means when they are burnt out. And similarly, I'll be telling if I were to work with a medical leader who's burnt out right now, I'll be talking about my own personal story. And I'll probably introduce Ariana's story, because she's obviously a great storyteller, as we know. She created Huffington Post and things like that. But, storytelling will be a great way to connect with yourself and other people. I think that's how we start. When we're so burnt out, we can't see anything else. Storytelling, it always touches that deep inner being, stories. But I guess to extrapolate that after the storytelling, it's starting to take baby steps or action steps to connect with yourself and others. And this is what we've been talking about all this while, that as leaders, we need to work on our inner world, our inner transformation. And that's what transformational leadership is all about, because a lot of times we can't change what's happening in our organization. Like leaders working in an organization, systems can be dysfunctional, to be honest. And they just I'm stuck in this helpless system. Like I just can't, no matter how much I do, I still feel like I'm stuck as a leader. Like I can't help my team members and I'm struggling to talk to the people up there, and I'm kind of in the middle. What do I do? Organization's not gonna change, but the inner transformation, which involves connection to self and others, really has to start from ourselves as leaders. And lastly, the last pillar I talked about, self-acceptance and self-kindness. Boy, this is the hardest. Because I feel as leaders, we are so used to putting other people's needs first, which we do. And as healthcare professionals, as healthcare leaders, they have to do that, putting team members' needs above them, putting patients' needs above them. And lo and behold, of course, our needs are last. And when we allow self-kindness, when we allow kindness into our heart, that's hard because you're so used to putting other people first. And when you start to put out yourself first, it's really challenging. Well, I talk about this concept called backdraft. I'm not a firefighter, but I know firefighters out there who, when they try to open that door, when there's all that smoke and oxygen has built up inside, when they open that door, they've experienced this gush of difficult fire sensation and just this blow of air that's so uncomfortable. And that's akin to what this third pillar is. And that's how leaders will probably start to experience when they start to do this practice of self-kindness, which is the last pillar. Very very hard. Easy on theory, because you're like, I just be kind on myself, right? But the actual muscle and practice is really challenging. And I experienced that firsthand, and my clients experience that firsthand themselves. But it's like a muscle. We have, to build up biceps or triceps or whatever. We have to, we work out in the gym how many times a week for this period of time. This self-kindness muscle, this self-acceptance muscle just takes time. And we just have to learn to be kind to ourselves and accept that it's going to just take a long time to build. And once you master the three pillars, that's the self-compassionate leader, self-compassionate healthcare leader, self-compassionate CEO leader, self-compassionate lawyer leader, many other industries. So that's how I see it, as self-compassion, and that's compassionate leadership as well. So that's essentially that in my own take on that, on self-compassion in leadership.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Olivia. And I think it is something for us all to think about in the audience, and to consider about your own self-awareness of your own mental and physical well-being, and being able to be self-compassionate about your own state and looking after yourself is something that's absolutely essential if you're then to turn around and also connect with others and to look after them. You've been listening to The Leadership Project with your host, Mick Spears. Join us each week as we bring you more thought-provoking guests. Don't forget to hit subscribe so that you are informed of all future episodes. If you're enjoying the show, it would be greatly appreciated if you can leave us a review and tell your friends about us. You are also welcome to join the Leadership Project Facebook community group. where we have an active conversation going about all things leadership. Please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.